The Gemara tells us in one location that God provided three exceptional overseers of the Jewish people, people responsible to lead the Jewish people. Who are they? Moshe, Aharon, and Miriam. They were all siblings. Moshe was the king. He was the leader. Aharon was the high priest. Miriam was that special prophetess. After the sea closed on the Egyptians, as Moshe led the men in song to sing the song of the sea, Miriam Hanaviyah, Miriam the prophetess, she had sung the song of the sea together with the women. That was Miriam Hanaviyah. Miriam initially, when Moshe was put into the Nile as a 3-month-old baby, she waited to see what was going to happen. And she watched how the daughter of Paro had fetched him from the Nile, and she wanted to see what was going to happen. Is he going to survive? Is he not going to survive? Why? Was she so curious? Because she had prophesied. She was only 6 years old at the time. She already was a prophetess to her father, Amram, who was the leader of the Jewish people, that our mother is going to give birth to the Redeemer of Israel. And all of a sudden now, Yocheved, the mother of Moshe, is putting him into the Nile. And there's a question, is he going to survive or not going to survive? So Amram, her father, goes and taps her on the forehead and says, let's see what's going to happen with your prophecy. Is it going to come to fruition or not? Because if he drowns, it's not going to be. And he survived, so she waited to see what was going to be regarding her prophetic vision that she had, which meant that stated he was the future, he was going to be Redeemer. And sure enough, he was saved by the daughter of Paro. They couldn't find a nursemaid because Moshe Rabbeinu, since ultimately he would be receiving the word of Hashem and he'd be directly communicating with Hashem with his mouth, it would be inappropriate for his mouth to nurse from a non-Jewish woman. So he would not nurse. And Pharaoh's daughter needed a nursemaid to nurse him. So Yocheved comes, Miriam comes, the sister, and he says to her, to the princess, I'll go fetch a Jewish nursemaid to nurse the baby. And she says, fine. Go fetch her, I will pay her fee. And who was the woman? His mother. Yocheved actually nursed Moshe, her son. And after he was weaned, she had brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter to adopt him. He became the adopted child of Paro's daughter, and he was the adopted grandchild of Paro before he fled at the age of 18, after he killed the Egyptian. So these are the three leaders. Moshe, Aharon, and Miriam, the three administrators of the Jewish people. So the Gemara tells us, Talmud tells us, that the manna that we had in the desert for 40 years, which was miracle food, it was a type of food, it nourished the person, the level of nourishment, whatever he had in mind, he wanted that food to take on that value, it took on that value, it took on that taste. According to one opinion, even took on the texture of that particular food. Not only that, it absorbed in the inner organs, there was no waste. They did not have to go out of the camp to bury the waste. So it provided tremendous convenience for them. They didn't complicate their lives. So in whose merit do we merit to have the man? So the Gemara says it was the merit of Moshe Rabbeinu. The clouds of glory, which protected us from all the elements. It actually, when they traveled, there was no incline, there was no hill. They didn't go down, they didn't go up, everything was flat. There were snakes and scorpions in the desert, which was the sides of logs. The clouds of glory just consumed everything. There was all like smoke going up. because everything was vaporized. The people, they walked barefoot. Normally, if a person's barefoot, ultimately, their feet swell because the shoe doesn't contain the foot. The feet did not swell. The clouds of glory healed them. Their clothing didn't have to be washed. The clouds of glory miraculously cleansed their clothing. The clothing they wore as children, as an animal, its hide grows with it. Miraculously, the clothing grew on the children. They never had to have more than one set of garments. This was the effect of the clouds of glory. That was in the merit of Aharon and his merit. The wellspring that traveled with us for 40 years, that was the merit of Miriam, the prophetess. Okay? What happens? This parsha, we speak about Miriam dies. She passes away. But Tamasha Miriam dies. And what happened? The moment she passes away, the wellspring ceases to exist. Ceases to exist. Because since the wellspring was only in the merit of Miriam, so if she's no longer here to provide that merit, it ceases. And that's what we read immediately. The Jews came and complained in a most disrespectful way to Moshe. You've taken us into the desert to die of thirst, and so on and so forth. And this is when Moshe struck the rock. He struck the rock when he was told to speak to the rock. And because of that, he was doomed and deemed not to enter into the promised land. But it was as a result of Miriam passing away, which caused the cessation of the wellspring. Okay? Gemara tells us in that same location that the three shepherds of Israel, they all passed away during the same month. Moshe, Aharon, and Miriam. So the Gemara asks, it's not true. We know Aharon passed away in Av, Miriam passed away during another month, and Moshe passed away in Adar. So how could the prophet say that all three shepherds, the shepherds of Israel, passed away during 1 month, where they passed away 3 different months? So the Talmud answers like this. The Gemara answers that after Miriam passed away, the wellspring was reinstated. In whose merit was reinstated? In merit of Moshe Rabbeinu. So the pinch, the ouch of not having water was very short-lived. It was restored immediately. In whose merit? In the merit of Moshe Rabbeinu. So now we still have the mun, we have the wellspring, we have the clouds of glory. The mun and the wellspring is the merit of Moshe. The clouds of glory, merit of Aharon. What happens when Aharon passes away? He also passed away during the 40th year. The clouds of glory dispersed, and we were attacked, and we went to war. And then the clouds of glory were restored. In whose merit? In the merit of Moshe. So at the end of the day, although initially each one of these gifts were due to 3 different people's merit, at the end of the day, where there were necessities for our existence, they all were reinstated in the merit of Moshe Rabbeinu. The mun, the wellspring, and the clouds of glory. So now let's understand. When a person loses something, if he's compensated or it's placed immediately, he doesn't feel the loss to the degree that he shouldn't feel it. Doesn't feel it. Why? Because the way a loss normally manifests itself and you experience it is because you're deprived. It manifests itself in deprivation. You're deprived. I'll give you an example. A child loses his or her mother or father, and the father was the breadwinner. And there was always food, there was always money for clothing, and the child was always taken on vacation, and all the amenities were provided. Now the father dies. What's lacking? The love that the father provided for the child. But everything else is exactly in place. even though maybe for a day or two there was a lapse because of the tragedy. But the only thing that is not replaced is the love of the father, because he's not there to love his children. His absence is noticeable. But over time, if the mother is special, she could compensate. She could, for that lack of love to her children, and she sets them. And eventually, time heals. As long as they have everything in place, the children don't feel the pinch and the bite because they have everything. What happens now if the mother, God forbid, dies? And the mother was the one who provided everything, which was provided by the father. And now the children feel bereft. It's not they don't have a mother. Now they understand what it means not to have a father. Now they have a mother and a father. So it's as if, due to the internalization and the experience of that loss, it's like they lost both parents at the same time. So the Gemara tells us that since ultimately everything that each one of them represented was reinstated due to Moshe, but when Moshe passed away, everything went dark. The month ceased, the wellspring ceased, and the clouds of glory ceased, which initially was the merit of all three of them. As a result of them, they experienced at this moment the loss. In retrospect, they had an appreciation for what Miriam represented and for what Aharon represented. So therefore, the prophet says all three shepherds, they passed away during the same month, because the impact and the effect of not having them was only internalized only when it was in reality where their lives no longer were the same due to the three of them not being there. But until then, Moshe covered everything. That's the Talmud. That's the Gemara's answer. But initially, did they appreciate who Miriam was? God knew who Miriam was. Moshe knew who Miriam was. Aharon knew who Miriam was. But did the Jewish people appreciate who she was? Oh, she's a holy woman. She says Tillim all day. And her blessings have great value. Moshe is real time. Aharon is the high priest. These people real time. Miriam, she's a holy lady. But do you understand what her dimension is? All along, they didn't even appreciate that the wellspring was in her merit. They thought, she just happens to be there. But the wellspring's unrelated to her being there. When did they realize that the wellspring was the merit of Miriam? Only when she passed away. When she passed away, then they realized. In retrospect, at this moment, that we survived all these 40 years in the desert, due to this miraculous wellspring, which supplied enough water for millions of people, and the livestock was in the merit of this little lady, Miriam the prophetess. I always say, Reb Chanina ben Dosa, which we just discussed, did many miracles. But there's a heavenly voice that comes out of Sinai every day that announces to the world that the whole world is sustained in the merit of Chanina ben Dosa, which for himself, his personal needs, should die lo b'kav charuv me'erev Shabbos and erev Shabbos. His subsistence is on a small measure of carob from Shabbos to Shabbos. That's all he has. He doesn't have more than that. Could you imagine? He doesn't have more than that. He's in the brink of starvation, but it's enough for him. And his merit, all the blessing, all the wealth, all the opulence, all the amenities, all the comforts of the world, he underwrites everything. So one of these rich, arrogant, pompous tycoons comes with his sable coat, right? And his 50-carat diamond ring that he wears on his pinky. Right? And he had to go to the chiropractor to have his finger, put back in place. And he looks at this little rabbi, this little holy man, and he condescendingly looks down on him. Could you imagine? Mr. Sable, Mr. Diamond, Mr. whatever you want to call yourself, you wouldn't exist if not for this little man. This little man is carrying the world on his shoulders. But he doesn't realize it. The Jews didn't realize and appreciate who Miriam the Neviah was. If not for her, there'd be no water. All the water for 40 years, millions, endless amounts of water for millions of people, for the livestock, was only in the merit of Miriam. If not for her, it wouldn't be. When did they realize it? After it was too late. She wasn't here any longer. So the level of honor or reverence or whatever you have to show her and to sing her praises continuously didn't exist because they didn't understand who she was. I remember when I studied yeshiva, there's a position in yeshiva, it's called mashgiach. Mashgiach doesn't mean like a supervisor in a catering establishment or in a restaurant. Mashgiach, the way it's translated, it means dean of men. He speaks, he deals with all the students, and he knows every student. This person happened to also be, he said, the most advanced Talmud class in the yeshiva right under my Rosh Yeshiva. And he studied in the Mir Yeshiva in Europe. Before the war, during the war, he was in Shanghai. And he was the closest student of the Mashgiach of the Mir, Rabbi Cheskel Levenstein, Zech Levroch, and Rabbi Rucham, who was the original Mashgiach in the Mir. And he passed away, he was 64 years old. Passed away 51 years ago when he was 64. And one of his friends who had studied with him in Europe eulogized him. And he had said at the funeral, when he was in Europe at the yeshiva, people understood he was special, but they really didn't understand how special he was. Why? In terms of his significance to the whole yeshiva. He never sought any level of acknowledgement, but factually he did so many things behind the scenes that people wouldn't have succeeded as they did in their studies and every other areas if he wouldn't have been behind the scenes doing many things. But because he never sought out any acknowledgement, many people never even knew who he was. The Rosh Yeshiva of the Mir in Europe knew who he was. The people who had to know who he was knew who he was. But among the student body, they didn't appreciate who he was. That was the crux of the eulogy. Because he never sought any honor or acknowledgement. He did the right thing because that's what you're supposed to do. That's who he was. Miriam Neviah. She understood that the wellspring was in her merit. Is she going to advertise it? She walks down the street and people, they tip their hat to her at best. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach, that's about it. But did they revere her? You understand? You're only hydrated, and you have whatever you have only with my merit. And she knew it. Not that she was looking for any acknowledgement. She was a humble woman, but she did not get her due. Why? Because the Chazal tells, the Midrash tells us, that when she passed away, the Torah tells us, the Jewish people, the complete whole congregation, Midbat Sin, they came to the Sin desert, B'chodesh Harishon, the first month, Nisan, Vayeshavon b'Kodesh, and they camped in Kodesh, Vatomish Miriam. And Miriam passed away there, Vatikov. And the moment she passed away, she was buried immediately. She was buried so quickly, they didn't even have time to eulogize her. Understand? Only after they eulogized her, all of a sudden they realized there's no wellspring. Now they woke up. What do you mean? She passed away even before you bury her. Eulogy. They didn't see her through the lens of who she really was. They didn't appreciate who she was. It says, Vatomos, she passed away, she was buried. End of the story. Out of sight, out of mind, you on with life. That's what happened. How many people wake up when it's too late in life? People have opportunities, but they don't appreciate the opportunity. Why? Because they're distracted, or they're too pompous, and they believe, because they have a few dollars in their pockets, they're the closest thing to God. The power of my arm brought about all this success. The golden calf, as they used to call it, the holy buck. That's what it was. So because they didn't appreciate who she was, they didn't eulogize her. Now, this group who did not understand who she was, who are they? It says, this Rashi cites the Medrash, this was the 40th year in the desert. What happened after the sin of the spies? God says that over 40 years, anybody between the age of 20 and up will perish, will die over the 40-year period because of the sin of the spies. We're in the 40th year now. Everybody, the old generation is no longer here. The generation that left Egypt, the generation that was at Sinai from 20 above, they're no longer here. This is the new generation. And Torah's making the point, Kol Edo B'nai Yisrael. B'nai Yisrael is the appellation for the advanced level of spirituality. When the Jews sin, they're always referred to as the people. If they're so-so, they're Am B'nai Yisrael. The word Am. But it's only B'nai Yisrael. That means they're all at the highest echelon of spirituality. So all this whole new generation, which are now worthy to go into the promised land, they did not eulogize Miriam. You could say maybe because they weren't, most of them weren't even born at the time of the splitting of the sea, or they weren't even born at Sinai. That's why they didn't appreciate her, but it does make a difference. Even though you weren't there, but you hear from your parents, who was Miriam? They didn't put her in some kind of secluded area that she was basically non-existent. She was still the sister of Moshe and the sister of Aharon. Give you an example, but you don't even have to say lahavdil. Person runs a very big business. He builds the business. And tremendous success. And then he tells his family, I think I'm going to retire. I'm going to transfer my assets. I'm going to set up a trust, do estate planning to minimize the taxes. And it should be in your best interest. Okay? The moment his father goes into retirement, when he was running that business, and the pulse was beyond your imagination, the profit, everything, he was driving it. His children revered him. Everybody revered him. All of a sudden now, he's a week in retirement. He's going on a cruise, coming back. He's the old man now. He's no longer in the driver's seat. What are you talking about? This whole business, who built it? Who created it? Unless you're there pushing that gas pedal, driving it immediately, you minimized that you're a faint recollection of the past. That's the reality of people. Of course, they treat you with respect, reverence, and they'll be kind to you, kind to me. Whatever you have, it's only because I created it for you. But the father, usually he swallows because it's his family. And they truly don't treat him as they should treat him, respectfully. They don't. Because, you're no longer in your prime. Miriam Neviah, at the time of the splitting of the sea, she initially saved Moshe Rabbeinu. She split at the sea as Moshe sang the song of the sea for the men, she for the women. Popular. This is something of the past. This is the new generation. They have no recollection who she was. For all intents and purpose, she was in retirement. And they weren't aware that the wellspring that they were benefiting from all these years was her. Of course, she was a special woman, Moshe's sister, Aharon's sister. But factually, they fell short of what they should have understood. It was only afterwards, when she already was buried, they did not eulogize her as they should have. They didn't eulogize her at all. So now we're talking about the elite. This is the new generation going into the land. The generation knows that their parents passed away because they were lacking in faith, and they said certain things. They spoke out of turn. And now the new generation, all of a sudden, when they're getting the pinch a little bit, they're starting to complain. And what are they saying? You say, maybe they didn't ask respectfully for the water. They said, something, did you take us into the desert to die? To die? I mean, you didn't learn the lesson from your parents. They're no longer here because they said the same words. This is like a replay of the past. Lo Yashom Mayim Lo Edo. They assembled around Moshe and Aharon. In earthly terms, they ganged up on them. They're going to launch their complaint. Vayorav in Moshe. In the people, you have more refined people, less the lower class people among this group, they began quarreling with Moshe. You don't need to quarrel. Could you quarrel with Moshe Rabbeinu? The man is still radiating the holiness from Sinai, that he had to wear a mask, you couldn't look at him. You're quarreling with Moshe and Aharon. They're quarreling. They don't appreciate who these people are, because when a person has a problem, what does he see? He only sees his problem. You don't see the forest from the trees. When everything's great, you sing that person's praises. The moment you feel that pinch and you believe it's going to take you down, all of a sudden, the past is blotted out, and all you see is, where are we today? We're in this situation because you brought us here. And you ever hear such talk? When you say people have short memories, it's an understatement. How short that memory is. Listen, Lu Gavanu, we should have died as our brothers died. Lifnei Hashem. We regret we're alive, because this is the nature of your leadership. Not finished. And why did you take the congregation of God into this desert? Lo mushom, to die there. Anachnu ubirenu. We and our livestock. You know something? You expect this from who knows what. Person who's the ingrate to the thousandth degree. You people. You saw what happened to the others. You understand who Moshe Rabbeinu is. You're quarreling him and saying this kind of those words. How do you even say those words out of your mouth? You took us to this terrible place. In the desert, it's not a location you could plant. The fig, the vineyard, the pomegranate. And on top of it, we have no water to drink. As they say, this takes the cake. This is the ultimate level of what? Of ingrate, lack of appreciation, not understanding who you're talking to over here. Moshe Rabbeinu, we'll see in a moment. He actually speaks out of turn against them. And he says, you rebellious people. They touched a raw nerve in him. And because of that, although God said, take your staff and talk to the rock, he struck the rock. And because he struck it, that's why he was punished, which we'll discuss. Let's talk about what does it take a person to become defiant or rebellious when he feels betrayed. What's a betrayal? Betrayal is not I offended you. You want us to believe whatever you want us to believe. And we believed it. And all of a sudden now, there's no water. Water is life. We're going to die. But just as you didn't die for the past 40 years, and miraculously there was a wellspring, do you think God's going to let you die of thirst? Right? Rationally speaking, doesn't make sense what you're saying. But they quarreled with Moshe Rabbeinu. And he said, we should have died in Egypt like our brothers died. We envied them. And where did you take us? Not to a place. Be a little patient. A little bit more going into the promised land. You can have everything. Some people, they don't see beyond their noses. They live for the now. Don't you understand there's a future? And there will be a future. No, the way we see it, the way we read the script, there's no future. There's only the now. And if we don't address the now, there is no future. That's what they're saying to Moshe Rabbeinu. We have a Moshe Aharon Menehu, Akol El Pesachol Moed. They came to the communion tent, and they prostrated themselves. Moshe and Aharon, Vayerik for Hashem Aleihim, and the glory of Hashem came upon them. V'daber Hashem Moshe Lemor. Moshe spoke. Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, "Kachas hamater, take your staff." This is the staff that he performed all the miracles in Egypt with. V'hakel es eido, assemble the same congregation. Atov Aaron achicha, you together with your brother, Aaron, your brother. The bartem el asel, and you're going to speak to the rock in their presence. And when you speak, the rock will give forth its water. Everything will be restated. It'll be enough water to feed, to give for the people and even for the livestock. Votseisem, Votseiso, Lemay minasela. You will take water out of the rock just by speaking to the rock. And you'll be able to water the congregation and the livestock. That's how much water is going to come out of this stone. We're talking about millions and millions of gallons. We have millions of people. You have endless livestock. That's what's going to happen. Okay? What was the whole idea of speaking to the rock? So Chazal tell us, the Medrash says, as a human being, there's a concept of reward and punishment. You make the right choice, you're rewarded. God forbid you make the wrong choice, or you could have made the right choice, you're punished. Nature is not subject to reward and punishment because they function as they're supposed to function. So they were supposed to draw a lesson from the rock. You speak to the rock where the rock is not compensated for giving forth its water. It functions as it's supposed to function. God said it's supposed to give forth its water, although it's supernatural. So the rock is not there for punishment or reward. But yet when you speak to the rock, it gives forth its water. So you people, that if you do the right thing, you're rewarded. And if you do the wrong thing, you're punished. Don't you think you should heed the word of Hashem? It's what we call the Kal V'chomer. If the rock, when you speak to, gives forth its water, do you need more than just speaking to you people? So by Moshe striking the rock, the lesson they would have drawn from the rock, they are not allowing that lesson to be drawn. Therefore, the punishment that Moshe and Aaron is, you had the ability to sanctify me in the eyes of the Jewish people, because this would have been the lesson they would have drawn. But because you struck the rock, rather than you hit the rock, rather than speak to the rock, this invaluable lesson cannot be learned. Therefore, you're held culpable. Therefore, you will not go into the promised land. This is the basis for this is the sin. It wasn't the striking. It was what speaking represents and what striking represents. Hashem says that when you speak to the rock will give forth its water, and there'll be enough water to feed the congregation and all their livestock. See, Rashi says something interesting. He should have said, the rock will give forth its water, meaning to feed the people and the livestock. Does Torah go out and identify that there'll even be enough water for the livestock? So Rashi cites Chazal, Mikan shechosa kodesh baruch hu mon shel Yisrael. Then when God performs a miracle, it's not only to provide for the people, even our possessions, which enhance our life, even perform the miracle that should be enough water to feed their livestock, to water livestock, because he's concerned that our financial status should not be undermined. This is the graciousness of Hashem. That's how magnanimous he is. It's not only for the people, even for the livestock. Okay? Hashem gives you good health, but he gets you a seat on the stock exchange, right? And he gets you a secretary, and you don't even have to spend much time there. You don't have to scream your lungs out on the trading floor. One of these things. That was for Larry, that comment. Okay. Why do you have to say it? So to tell us, Hashem is even concerned not only for our existence, but even for our financial situation. It should not be undermined and compromised. Okay. So I asked the question. It's the 40th year. The people have livestock, flocks, herds, endless amounts of cattle. Until now, before the wellspring ceased, what provided water for the people and the livestock? This wellspring. The wellspring was reinstated. So what do we have to bring proof that God's concerned for our material welfare, our financial status? Because when he said, I will bring the water back, it'll not only to water you, but even your livestock. But what about all the years that the wellspring was giving sufficient water, that we have livestock? Where did the flocks come from? Evidently, the water from the original wellspring was enough, which is a miracle. God was providing water. So all of a sudden now, we make such an issue? From here we see to what degree God is concerned for our financial situation. That's the question. You understand the question? So what we once said was this. When we left Egypt, what were we? Were we really worthy of redemption? We weren't really worthy. We're idolaters. Although we retained our identity, our names, our clothing, our language, but we were at, spiritually speaking, we were in literally the low point in the history of the Jewish people. We were totally devoid of any spirituality. So why did God redeem us? And why did God provide the mun, the wellspring, and the clouds of clay? Why? So there's a famous Shalah Kodesh. The Holy Shalah says, when the Jews left Egypt, what was the objective of leaving? To go to Sinai 50 days later to become the Jewish people. We were going to address the objective of creation, because at Sinai, the world was created on the condition that there's going to be a Jewish people and they're going to accept the Torah and live by the Torah. If they choose not to, the world reverts back to pre-existence. So when we left Egypt, it was to address that objective. That if we say Nasiv and Ishma, we accept God's offer, the world takes on a permanent status, and we go forth. If not, it's over. But so when we left Egypt, what exactly was the value of that leaving? So he explains, it's the equivalent of the beginning of a new existence. The Jewish people, not a new era, it's a new dimension of existence when we left Egypt. Now, when God created the world, he created the world with all the amenities for a human being to be able to live in that world. The person who's truly evil even denies God's existence. He has access to water. He has access to agriculture. He has access to everything. Why? Because the world is made up of all kinds of people. Righteous, middle of the road, evil, all kinds of people. If you want to have a world, whatever you provide, the basic amenities is for everyone. It's not determined what your spiritual status is. When we left Egypt, that's the beginning of a new existence. So that Hashem provided water for our livestock, our cattle. Why? Because that's the beginning. It's like when the world was created. You have no worthiness, but if you want to have a world, you provide the basic amenities. After 40 years, we're no longer speaking the beginning of a creation. We're talking about it ceased, it's to reinstate. Reinstate now, that's a gift. You have to be worthy of that gift. So Hashem says, I will give it back. But did they have sufficient worthiness to even provide water, even for the livestock? The answer is no. It's the people. So why did God provide water even for the livestock, which would entail millions more gallons of water coming out of this wellspring? The answer is because Hashem is concerned for our possessions. He doesn't want we should have any reversals in our financial, economic area. That's why. So that shows tremendous chesed Hashem. This is the ultimate chesed. Although you may not be worthy, and I will reinstate it, maybe it's enough that you should have a Jewish people. But their economic backbone, maybe forget about it. And they'll come on to others. No. Even though you're evil and you don't deserve it, you're a different class, but because Hashem is concerned for our financial welfare, not only did he provide water for the people, he provided water for our possessions. We say in the Amidah, the second bracha, Machalkel Chaim Bechesed. God sustains life with indiscriminate kindness. Chesed is indiscriminate kindness. Right? Mechayim Meisim Berachmim Rabim. When he provides life, it's Bechesed, indiscriminate. What about resurrection? Not only is resurrection not Chesed, it's not only not Rachmim, it's Rachmim Rabim. It's with enormous Rachmim, enormous mercy. When a person is born into this world, what does it say in the Mishnah Pirkei Avos? Anybody who comes into this existence, you're born against your will. You have no say in the matter. God says your soul has to come into this existence. What about when you live your life, regardless of what it is? Against your will, you're alive. And what about it's checkout time? Does the person want to check out? The answer is it doesn't make a difference. If God says it's checkout time, it's checkout time. You have no choice when you come into existence. You have no choice when you live your existence, and you have no choice to end your existence. That's what it is. Because everything is God. What is that? That's the reality of life. That's chesed, indiscriminate kindness. What you do with your life, that's another discussion. But what God is providing that. Unlimited opportunity. Are we speaking about something which is not fathomable? No. Okay? So it says, B'chalkel Chaim B'chesed. When you come into this existence, all the amenities of life are there. A person can be a Rasha, a person can be a tzaddik. It's all there. What about now a person passes away and you have to be brought back, be resurrected? When you come back now, you have to have special merit. Is mercy enough? Even mercy is enough. Mechayim Meisim Berachmim Rabim. You need enormous mercy. Same idea. When we left Egypt, the beginning of a creation, you have a world, you provide all amenities for all humanity. Now that it ceases to bring it back, it's not simple. You have to have tremendous merit. So why, when God gives us the water, why does he give us more water than actually we need for ourselves, even for our livestock? There's only one answer. Because Hashem is concerned about our financial situation. And therefore he provides the additional water that we should not have any financial reversals or we should be we should be financially sound for that reason. You know something? A person is born wealthy because it was determined originally people should be wealthy. Then they lose their wealth. Once a person loses it, God forbid, it doesn't come back so easily. You know, you say there are ups and downs, but a person went off the cliff financially. To bring him back, very often people, they had their moments of glory. The moment they had that downfall, for the rest of their lives, they never come back. To come back is a whole different story. You need enormous merit to come back. If you do come back, you have to understand that's merit. Without merit, you're not coming back. So you have to appreciate the reinstatement that it's really God's kindness. And if you don't appreciate it, God forbid, you can have a repeat performance. You take the second dive. And when you second dive, you know, you may hit the bottom, you may come up again. Okay, we'll stop here.